Have you heard? Metro by T-Mobile now includes Amazon Prime. Yes, enjoy the best of shopping and entertainment, movies, TV shows, music, free shipping, and much more. All included for just $40 per line for 3 lines. All on the T-Mobile network. Discover the smarter way. Metro by T-Mobile. That's genius. One offer per account. Offer subject to change. $12.99 per month value. Offer valid for new Amazon Prime members. Metro customers may notice reduced speeds versus some T-Mobile customers. Video at 480p. Capable device required. See store for details and terms and conditions.
Aloha, everyone, and welcome to Aquarian Radio at aquarianradio.com. And I'm your host, Janet Carolesson. And today we have Linda and Richard Smith, and we're going to be talking about the Invisible College. And the Invisible College is a phrase that refers to the way art and technology have been used to educate the masses locally and globally on a grand scale to empower the people through metaphor, symbolism, and storytelling. The genres can include anything from painting, sculpture, mixed media arts, writing, literature, music, performance art, and theater, as well as the most prolific and highly influential ones out of all of them, which is television and filmmaking. The Invisible College functions by leaving educational messages just beneath the surface of the celluloid to wake up the general public on a subconscious level. As utterly amazing as it is to discover this, consider what it would be like to apply it to the paranormal and esoteric film genres. Imagine how far you could go with this in the so-called science fiction arena. Ultimately, the Invisible College repeatedly exposes over and over the powerful visual storytelling motifs of what is the Moor, the Mason, and the alien, the golden thread that runs through our entire history as well as our modern-day society. Fascinating. I'm so excited to talk about this. Linda and Richard, welcome to Aquarian Radio. And whoever wants to talk first, go ahead and tell us more about this subject.
Oh, want me to do it?
Yes.
Well, thank you for having us back on the show there, Janet. This is awesome. And
my apologies for being so out of it. I had the flu for like 2 months, and a couple people I know died, but I made it. I'm still here, and it was just awful. But yes, we're so delighted to be able to reschedule this. So go ahead.
I do talk about where the inspiration for this originally came from in the book, The Moor, the Mason, and the Alien. And kind of started out around maybe 1993, 94, when one of my teachers at college, his name is Steve Duncombe, he was teaching politics in media, okay? So I became very interested in taking that class, and he found out what I was doing as an artist in the visual arts department there with my artwork. So one day we struck up a conversation in class, and one of the assignments was to take a 1980s action movie like Rambo First Blood Part 2 and dissect all the symbolism that Sylvester Stallone was putting into it, and then reconstruct the whole movie with the symbolism. And sure enough, it was the first time I realized how intelligent movie directors like Sylvester Stallone or Steven Seagal is and what they do with their movies and the layer of symbolism. And once we had that lesson in class and basically picked that movie apart, deciphered it, and put it back together, he had come to me afterwards. He says, this is what people would refer to as the invisible college. He says, now imagine what you could do with this in the paranormal and esoteric arenas. And he says, think about what's hiding in all those science fiction movies. And that's where that began. And as time went on, I started looking at a lot of my favorite movies in a totally different light and understanding what the real symbolism was. Lynn,
I have a question. If you want to, if you could pause right there. I do have a question before we get too far down the line. So you're saying that Sylvester Stallone was the one that was the genius behind putting this symbolism in there, or is this happening I've seen things about like the Disney symbolism. Is there somebody maybe working with all these different companies and actors and
there's Sylvester Stallone. Yeah, Sylvester Stallone being just one example. I mean, we could take this anywhere with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and James Cameron. Stanley Kubrick. A lot of Francis Ford Coppola. I mean, we could go in a lot of directions. It's just that Sylvester Stallone was a good example to start with because he has these powerful symbolisms in there that everybody conveniently overlooks.
So what were some of those things he had, and what was his agenda? What did you figure out from his example?
One example would be his symbolism is always the little guy can overcome anything, and technology is not something to embrace as a toy, but something to use as a necessary evil, and then when you're done using it, you throw it away. You see that in all of his movies. He uses a gun. When he's done with it, he doesn't hang on to it like Arnold Schwarzenegger would. He throws it away. And that's why for the longest time, there was no way for someone like a Sylvester Stallone and someone like an Arnold Schwarzenegger to appear in the same movie together, because their symbolisms and their motifs were so off base from each other. Sylvester Stallone was more like an H.G. Wells type of movie director, where if you let technology take over, it becomes a bad thing. Whereas Arnold Schwarzenegger was more like a Jules Verne type actor and director, where he treated technology like, wow, look at all these toys I can play with. Okay? So, and Sylvester Stallone was very much about the individual overcoming insurmountable odds, whereas Arnold Schwarzenegger was very much about, I am this big giant mountain, I am invincible, nothing can beat me. Okay? And Sylvester Stallone's characters tended to be very much like a Batman type character. Very dark, operating from the shadows, very solitude. Whereas Arnold Schwarzenegger's characters were very much like Superman. This black and white mentality between, well, this is absolutely good and this is absolutely evil, and there was no gray spots there. So it took a very, very long time for these two to actually get together and start making movies together. And one of the first ones they ever did together, surprisingly enough, is when I forget the name of it. I think it was called Breakout, or it was a prison movie where they're both stuck in the same prison together and they're forced to work together, which is a powerful symbolism in itself, considering they're two very different actors. They don't exist in the same universe. So that's how they started off that working relationship in movies, and since then they've been doing more movies together. action-packed as they are, and maybe not so symbolic, but fun to watch. But they finally come together. Many years ago, back in the 90s, Sylvester Stallone had done a very interesting interview with Charlie Rose on, I think it was PBS and 13. And even Charlie Rose asked him, he says, what would it take to get you two together? And he says, he says, Sylvester Stallone, the movie I was trying to refer to is Escape Plan. That was their first movie together. But
okay.
But he said on the Charlie Rose interview, he says, in order for us to be doing a story together, be in the same movie together, he would have to come towards my way a little bit more and, be a little bit more serious with the storyline. And he says, I would have to meet him halfway and maybe be a little bit more lightened up and not so dark.
Uh-huh.
So, and what's interesting is that's what happened with the movie Escape Plan. They actually accomplished that.
So were these things conscious or unconscious that they did? Were they choosing these movies based on their own personalities and maybe their soul path or spiritual path? Did you go into another level?
Yeah, it's a lot of it with the movie directors, as well as artists and writers and singers and composers. I mean, we could take this into the realm of the Beatles and Pink Floyd if you wanted to, but a lot of it is handed down to them. Okay, now whether that's downloading or something that's physically handed off to them as a document that says, here, do this, work this into your movie, work this into your story, it could go either way there. All right. A lot of the Sylvester Stallone, Steven Seagal, Mel Gibson type genre movies, you'll notice, are very much in the genre of conspiracies and what's happening behind the scenes, and how does the little guy, the average person, overcome these big bad, conglomerate conspiracies that are going on behind the scenes. In the movie, going back to the original example, Rambo First Blood Part 2, when he comes up against this wall of machinery, which obviously represents this, master hive mentality, this master machine that is manipulating everything. He takes a piece of technology of his own, which is the machine gun, destroys the master computer, and then when he's done, he throws the gun away. He doesn't keep it. And that's a powerful symbolism. On top of that, the bad guys he's up against, they are extremely well organized. They all wear the same uniform, sort of like you'd see in Star Wars with the stormtroopers, all uniformed.
Right.
And the people he's rescuing, they're not uniform. They're dressed all differently. They're dressed in, like the bad guys would always be dressed in black. But the people he's rescuing, they're all dressed in earth tones, different colors. George Lucas carried that over to Star Wars. The good guys were all dressed in these ragtag earth tones, all different from each other, whereas the bad guys were all uniform, all black, all white, maybe a splash of red here and there to add contrast, as a striking contrast between the black and white. But, this was Rambo First Blood Part 2 had actually struck a tremendous nerve chord with a lot of veterans when that movie came out. Nobody seemed to realize that. And so there was another layer of symbolism there where here he is as this small guy, this one individual guy, going in against the big bad enemy conspiracy all dressed in black. And here he is actually picking them apart one at a time and creating chaos for them. And that was a role reversal from, let's say, the Vietnam War, which is, what a lot of his movies were inspired by, because in the Vietnam War, the chaos was used against us, and everything went to hell. And this was in his way of saying, okay, let's go back and fix that dialogue. Let's put it back the way it should have been. So there was that layer, too, that a lot of war veterans tuned into right away with that movie. And that was another layer of symbolism he was putting out there, almost like a catharsis for them.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, I was thinking we both the uniforms in Star Wars, the original one, which I remember because I watched it like 20 times, like everybody did back then. That apparently had some kind of programming that everybody watched it over and over again. But the lead, the female, was in white. So she was. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the old, Indian and villain shows. The villains were black and the cowboy was in white. That going back in the 40s and 50s, and there we were in the 70s. And like you said, the heroes, they tended to have earth tones. That's right. Let's look at what Luke wore and what Han Solo wore. But I don't think there were no like blues or greens. They were earth tones, right? Yeah.
Right.
You know what that?
And they were
how that happened? What was that about? That they were.
Yeah, it was the first time.
Black, that color.
Between Ridley Scott's Alien and George Lucas's Star Wars, it was the first time that you saw space presented in a dirty manner, unclean. Okay, this ragtag band of rebels, the Millennium Falcon was dirty, or the Nostromo from Alien, it was dirty. It was, a human environment. The walls were smudged. Nothing was clean and pristine like you see in Stanley Kubrick's 2001. Okay.
Right. Everything was white.
There was more.
Sterile.
Right. There was more of a human side to it, as to what it would really be like. Then again, Kubrick's view and then Arthur C. Clarke's view was space travel will all be funded by the government and it'll be clean and pristine and ideal and democratic. And whereas, George Lucas and Ridley Scott were like, screw that. Space travel is going to be taken over by the corporations, and this is what it's going to turn into. So that was a much more realistic view that everybody tuned into because they could relate to that in their everyday lives. But that's, and as far as Princess Leia being dressed in white, well, that makes her the ultimate rebel because her father is Darth Vader, who is dressed in black. So she's dressed as the opposite in white and working with the Rebel Alliance, standing up to her corporate father, okay? And she was raised very differently from her brother Luke. She was raised with privilege and political entitlement and political connections, okay? Whereas her brother Luke was the outcast, the farm boy, stranded on a dirt planet. So there was a drastic difference between the way the two were raised. And
were either of them aware? They didn't know they were brother and sister, and they didn't know who their father was. So they were adopted, right, by other people. I'm going back. I haven't seen this. Right? They were adopted.
They were intentionally split up. Yeah, exactly. And it's a powerful symbolism with that brother and sister relationship because he comes from a low-class family of farmers. She comes from a high-class family of politics, and yet the two of them were still able to come together and unite. That's a powerful social message being sent out to the general public that, the well-to-do and the middle class and the poor are going to have to work together against the corporate empire if they're going to succeed, instead of fighting with each other and stabbing each other in the back.
And then, of course, they play with that other story where the siblings who don't know that they're related fall in love, or at least in lust or something, and they have some kind of attraction for each other, and then it's like, oh my God, you're my brother, you're my sister. So, right. Fascinating. Sounds like a great class. I wish I could have participated. But so Arnold is, these are like archetypes that are playing out. The hero's journey. Well, they're both kind of heroes.
Yeah.
Hero's journey.
Right. And what I had done was I started taking that whole idea of the invisible college and applying it to the realm of science fiction and focusing on film, movies, and television with the stuff that I was getting into. The Moorish legacy, the Masonic agenda, alien contact, and extraterrestrial intervention. And I figured I would put it to the test and see if that's coming out in any way, shape, or form in the Invisible College. Well, as it turns out, the examples are abundant everywhere once you start going down that road. And the primary example, the ace number one example, happens to be Linda's and my favorite TV series. It's Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Okay.
Okay. That's
so
usually
what makes
the example.
Star Trek Deep Space Nine your favorite? It's like a quick question. What's your favorite Star Trek, series? Was it Picard? Was it Kirk? So what makes Deep Space Nine your favorite one?
Well, for me personally, I just love irritating the hell out of the Star Trek fans, because there's a lot of Star Trek fans who shun Deep Space Nine as like, it's not real Star Trek. Well, yes, it is, idiot, because once you get out there, you're going to realize there's a lot of entities who want to see you dead, and then what are you going to do? Peace, love, and harmony is great until you have a gun pointed at your face. So I love Deep Space Nine for that, because it got into a much more realistic approach, and you didn't have to go traveling in a spaceship to find it, because they proved in that series they stayed in one spot, a space station, and all this crap came to them. All the problems came to them. So it was basically like Bonanza in space, okay? The Ponderosa. All the problems came to the Ponderosa, all right? And that's what was so phenomenal. Even my dad got into it because it reminded him of, the Ponderosa and the old westerns. And so there was something even he could relate to on that, where it didn't have to be a spaceship that was traveling around and coming in contact with all this weird crap out there. All you had to do was stay in one spot and everything came to you. But through a wormhole, yes, on top of that.
Right, through a wormhole. But what's interesting is I actually have a whistleblower that says that they were stationed on a space station and it was outside of a wormhole, but it was like a series of 5 big ships that were kind of like little what's the word I want to call it? Like almost like Dyson spheres, or they had their own ecologies. Each ship had their own ecologies, and it was just like Deep Space Nine. They had so somebody came and they needed a certain environment. They had the little micro environments for them. They couldn't breathe oxygen, for example. They could be in their little section. Some of the I want to call them ships. I guess they were ships, but they were more like little planetoids. They were used for their manufacturing. Another one was for growing food, and one was for developing different species. It was a genetics lab, and they would create insects and mammals and all kinds of things that they would sell, and then people could populate their planet with life, to see how the different beings would fare or evolve. So it was a very complex story. When something is that detailed, it makes you think like, oh, okay, there's some validity to it. But so
Yeah.
Go ahead, back to you.
At the time, you bring up a good point, because at the time that Star Trek Deep Space Nine was out, Babylon 5 had come on the scene too, and was a very good miniseries, a 5-season miniseries, and it got into all that where they had to create these different habitats for the different alien beings and the different plant life. So yeah, it was like each cabin, sphere, or section, it was a totally alien environment that was created just for that particular species to coexist with the humans. So yes, I've seen that come out too in Babylon 5. But with Star Trek Deep Space Nine, you had something that was phenomenally different. Not, first of all, phenomenally different from all other Star Trek genres, as well as all other science fiction, period. Because here you have, all of a sudden, a black commander who, in a very short time, becomes a black captain of Deep Space Nine and holds sway over a lot of political decisions in that arena, and also has to become a wartime captain as well to go up against insurmountable odds. And then, of course, there is his shapeshifter friend who kind of becomes an orphan that he takes under his wing, the constable, Odo, okay? The outcast, the freak who didn't belong, all right? And his lieutenant, first officer, was a woman who was a rebel freedom fighter in her own right, okay? So there's all these this new territory that Gene Roddenberry wished he could have done back in the 60s and couldn't and wasn't allowed to. But the thing is, there's a lot of reasons why Deep Space Nine stands out so differently. One of them has to do with an anecdotal story that I found out about several years ago. I haven't been able to verify it or prove it or anything, but it does have a lot of resonance to it as to why all of a sudden Deep Space Nine jumped out onto the television screen as something totally different. And as it turns out, in the wild and woolly days of the 60s, psychedelic 60s and experimentation and all that, it seems that Gene Roddenberry and Nigel Barrett had gotten themselves involved with an interesting channeling session, okay, with a channeler at the time. And this was before he was even ready to sit down and write anything about Star Trek with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Yeah.
So what did Majel and Rod? I thought Gene. Well, I guess Gene pulled Majel into the very first pilot. So yeah, he knew her. He knew her work. But okay, continue the story. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I was just backtracking.
And then
so they
in
went
that
to a channeling thing.
Yeah. Now there's no telling, if we put any stock in this side story, there's no telling how many people were involved with that channeling session, whether it was 9 people, including the channeler, Gene Roddenberry and Nigel Barrett, or if it was just 3 of them, or what the case was. But out of that channeling session, a lot of stuff started being written down by the channeler that was being funneled through the channeler. Turns out what they got in contact with was something referred to as the Council of Nine. Okay? And in that Council of Nine channeling session, whatever this extraterrestrial Council of Nine was, all this information flooded through to the channeler, was written down at the request of Nigel Barrett and Gene Roddenberry. And unfortunately, at the end of it, the channeler was given one last message, and they were told, you're not allowed to release this information right now. Keep it under wraps, okay? So no one was allowed to talk about it. But that channel session Gene Roddenberry then changes it somewhat to be Wagon Train to the Stars, and gets the characters Kirk and McCoy. Whereas, in truth, had that channeling session and the script that was written down from what was channeled been allowed to be its true form, it would have been Deep Space Nine, which is where they got the term Deep Space Nine from. It was influenced by the Council of Nine. So this is how the name comes about, which then only adds to the Star Trek universe, because now you have Deep Space Nine. Well, that means you must have Deep Space 1 through 8 and 10 through whatever. So now all of a sudden, these imaginary space stations start cropping up in the background of the Star Trek story because of that channeled session, whereas prior to that, they didn't exist. And it was all because of Deep Space Nine being forced into the storyline at a time when 30 years on into the 90s, it was finally okay to talk about this controversial stuff, have a black captain, have a woman as a first officer, have a shapeshifter, as a police officer, okay? And have a wormhole now with the ultimate enemy coming through the wormhole at any given moment, okay? So, it's like all of a sudden this stuff starts erupting out of Deep Space Nine, and people are looking at the rest of, Star Trek Next Generation, Star Trek Voyager, original Star Trek, and they're like, this is totally different. Where did this come from? There was a very different feeling about it. It didn't necessarily have to be a cerebral environment anymore. Now it was much more visceral and hands-on, because Captain Sisko was very hands-on. This, of course, was symbolized by his favorite sport being baseball. Okay. Right. So you can tell right off the bat he was much more of a hands-on approach captain there. He had the personality for it, a very different personality. Okay. He was aggressive when he had to be. He was very intelligent, political, and diplomatic when he had to be. He could change whatever roles he wanted, and you weren't used to seeing that, because prior to that, captains were on board a starship and they had a very singular personality for that starship. Right. Okay. So all of a sudden you got this versatile guy who's getting slammed with politics left and right from every different species conflicting with each other. So there's that element that had never been seen before. Okay. And all of a sudden it was like, Deep Space Nine is the United Nations. All right. Yeah. Trying to keep the peace there and keep back the ultimate threat, which is coming no matter what. And he's trying to warn the rest of Starfleet, you better get on board with this and stop acting like there's nothing here. Okay? Then one day, as I'm getting more and more into things within our own society, the Moorish legacy, the Masonic agenda, and how alien contact intermingles with that. I'm sitting there one day having a cup of coffee with a friend of mine who knew what I was getting into with the Invisible College. And I looked at him one day, I said, oh my God, I figured it out. And I sat there and went down the whole litany of symbolism in Deep Space Nine with the Moorish legacy and the Masonic agenda. And he almost fell out of his chair when I told him everything. He says, you're right. He says, it matches. That's exactly what they're doing with the series. And the symbolism of the Invisible College that I'm ultimately referring to is that across the way, and you see it, the newest incantation being Black Panther, okay? But in Deep Space Nine, you have the master teacher, the master prophet, the Christ figure, a dark-skinned Christ, okay? Captain Sisko, all right? He is known as the emissary, which is just another word for Christ, okay? He is the emissary to the gods of the wormhole, Well, okay, what is the wormhole? Well, that's a female representation because it represents the umbilical cord, the birthing process, going from one reality to another. This comes out in many different forms. Wormhole, hyperspace gateway, stargate, black hole, whatever you want to call it. You go in one side, you come out the other, but when you come out the other side, you are reborn into a new reality, just like a newborn infant. Okay? Even in the movie Poltergeist, she comes out the other side, reborn, with amniotic fluid all over her. So it's the same thing. And he, as the Christ figure, the emissary, is in charge of guarding that vril symbol, which is the wormhole, the vagina, the uterus, the ovaries. Okay? And as such, Deep Space Nine becomes its own form of symbolism in the Moorish legacy, this being referred to as the Temple of Solomon. This is symbolized very powerfully in one particular episode. Captain Sisko is looking out the window down at Bajor, another Class M planet. Yeah, Bajor, right. It's actually planet Earth. That's what the symbolism is for. They just stuck it by Bajor to create a different storyline. Whereas Bajor represents Earth. And what is hovering around Earth/Bajor? The Temple of Solomon with the Christ figure who comes down from the sky. And that's Deep Space Nine. You know, regardless of storyline architecture, who created the station, the point is the station looks like a castle floating in the sky, a Temple of Solomon. And one day, one particular episode, he looks out the window, looks down at Bajor, and he says, I believe he was talking to his son, Jake, and he says, one of these days, I am going to go down to that planet and I am going to build a house. That was a powerful Christ symbolism. I am going to come down from the sky and build a new Temple of Solomon on Earth. Okay?
Great.
And this coming from the black emissary, the dark-skinned emissary, the dark-skinned Christ. And with that comes now the further symbolism. Who does this master teacher take under his wing? What he takes under his wing is the pale-skinned outcast, the shapeshifter, the one who doesn't belong to the family of man, but is taken into the family of man and welcomed into the Temple of Solomon as a member of the family, a long-lost member of the family who was shunned by his own family, thrown out, casted out. So the Christ figure takes him in and says, I will teach you a better way. I will teach you how to stand for something good, just, and right, so that when you do confront your own people again, you know exactly what to do. And, of course, who are Odo's people? The ultimate enemy. A billion pale-skinned corporate shapeshifters all working as a hive mentality, a.k.a. corporate America. And they want to dominate the wormhole. Well, that means destroying the viril power. That means raping and molesting the vagina, the uterus. And, of course, what do they send through against the will of the gods, the emissary of the gods, against their will? What do they send through the wormhole to try and destroy the Alpha Quadrant? They send through their own second-class economic slaves, a.k.a. blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, represented as Jem'Hadar drug addicts. And what's the drug they're addicted to? Cocaine, this liquidy white, and heroin, okay? They never give a name to it, but you know what the hell it is. It's heroin, cocaine, crack, okay? A white liquid, okay? It doesn't get plainer than that.
They call it the white. The
white, yeah. They just called it the white. And then now that's a reference to what, white masters will always do to a black community, a Native American community, a Hispanic community. They'll get them hooked on drugs by turning them against themselves and then turning them into slaves to the white corporate regime, for which they have to now assimilate if they want to be equal. So the Jem'Hadar are permanently obedient to their white shapeshifter corporate masters. And of course, what do? They send them through the wormhole like a bunch of deranged pit bulls. And by sending them through the wormhole, it's an act of war against the umbilical cord, against the vagina, against the wormhole. Okay? And that's a total rape and molestation of the vril power. So when they come through the wormhole, what's the first thing they target? They go after the Temple of Solomon. They go after the emissary, the dark-skinned Christ. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's his job to stand up to, these pale-skinned, shifty, shadowy shapeshifters who never have any real form. You really don't know what they really look like. Okay? And in doing so, the one pale-skinned outcast who becomes, the adopted son of Captain Sisko, Odo, has to make a decision as to which side he's on, and he decides to fight for the side of the Temple of Solomon. He stays on Sisko's side and fights with them against his own people, turning against his own kind. Okay? So a lot of powerful symbolism there. And then, of course, you go down to Bajor/Earth, and Major Kira represents the other half of that, the vril power. She has the Temple of Solomon already down there waiting for the emissary. Okay? And that in itself becomes a battle of wits between the corrupt high priesthood versus the genuine, spiritual essence of the Temple of Solomon. And in ancient history, what that relates to is basically the original high priesthood of the Egyptian university system, the Commission Mysteries being the Amun. And then the Greys came in, took over, warped it, raped it, molested it, and turned it into this abortion known as the Amun-Ra, which then later on becomes Vatican City. So a lot of powerful symbolism, Moorish legacy, Masonic agenda, alien contact coming out of Deep Space Nine. Once you lay the groundwork there for the symbolism, then you can start going to other franchises like The Matrix, Star Wars, Star Trek itself again, okay, and across the board, Babylon 5, wherever you want to go with it, okay, all of a sudden it becomes abundantly clear. I mean, once you see it in Deep Space Nine, it's basically slapping you in the face with The Matrix.
Right.
Avatar.
So it's interesting. This is fascinating, absolutely fascinating, because we can, right now, it seems like the consciousness of Hollywood has shifted to Marvel Comics. And there's a lot of symbolism in there. It's recreation of the Anunnaki story, the gods, and you have Thor, you have Loki, all these different characters.
Yeah.
And I'm actually rewatching Battlestar Galactica, and they have no aliens. That was one of the things Edward James almost said. I will not star in a show that has all these aliens. But they do have artificial intelligence, and they're taking over and killing off humanity. But they have a very diverse crew. You have Adama.
Yes, and that was the first time you see a Hispanic actor being a captain, and he was the perfect pick for it. So he was excellent.
Yes, and then there's all the characters are different, colors. A lot of, there's a major women. The women in that show, Starbuck is a woman, right? But the ones running the ships and fixing them are a lot of women, and they get out there and they shoot them up and they save the day and take out Cylons and stuff like that. So it's fascinating, this whole thing that you're doing. Yeah, go ahead, back to you.
Then with Battlestar Galactica, another aspect of the Invisible College is the supposed and predicted singularity against the human condition. And you see that come out in Battlestar Galactica, where they do play upon the old series with the reboot, which I thought was awesome, because they get into showing you the traditional Cylons, how they evolved into the new Cylons, and then how they evolved into the artificial life forms that look like human. So that was a representation of the hive mentality taking over the human condition.
Mm-hmm. Now, these ones seem to be playing out the story of the Greys wanting to have a soul. I mean, I'm rewatching it. So they're falling in love with humanity. Some of them don't even know that they're, artificial intelligence. They're not aware who they are. I watched the series years ago when it was somewhat new, and I know how it ends. So, is that panning out today? These things that we have in our science fiction from 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, whatever.
Yeah.
Is that what's happening with things like Sophia and of course they use the name Sophia for the robot that's handsome robotic who's taken around the world, and she was granted citizenship from the Saudis. So that's more symbolism there, not even in fiction, but in what's panning out, what's playing out with AI.
What I
robotics.
find very interesting is that in a lot of your TV shows and movies, they are now implementing a lot of political and economic perspectives into the storyline. One of my all-time favorite movies was the way they did the Civil War, Captain America Civil War. And they created this division right down the middle between Captain America, once again representing the Sylvester Stallone character, okay, and Iron Man representing the Arnold Schwarzenegger character, okay, and that archetype there. And Iron Man, it's in his name, Iron Man. He's the straw man. He's the robot who goes along with the corporate mentality of the intelligence agency, and that all these mutants they need to be categorized and controlled and subdued. And Captain America's like, no, that's not the American way. You're not supposed to do that. And this creates the title itself, the Civil War, the breakdown between the good guys taking sides over the issue. And ultimately, Captain America and the people who side with him, once again, what does he become? He becomes the white outcast of his own kind, shunned. And who takes him under his wing? Black Panther, the king of Wakanda, Prince, and gives him a safe haven in a country that no corporate regime is allowed to touch. So that was powerful symbolism in itself that resulted in the popularity of Black Panther being the ace #1 superhero movie of all time. And still, the studio execs, who I'm sure are all white, are still scratching their heads wondering, what the hell did we just do? How did Black Panther become this popular? What just happened? And it's a reaction on behalf of the people to the last 30 years, 40 years since the 70s, of the Invisible College erupting to the surface over and over again and gaining momentum, starting with Spielberg and Lucas, okay, and Francis Ford Coppola and Stanley Kubrick and James Cameron. This carried through right to the 80s, into the 90s, into the 2000s, and then bam, all of a sudden, you've got something that goes even further than Captain Sisko himself. You have this black superhero, Black Panther, who is now everybody's favorite. How the hell did that happen? He's more popular than Iron Man and Captain America, the two white guys. So, studio executives, and it's about time, yes. And the studio executives are still scratching their head because they don't understand that. They don't get it.
Do you think that might be a reaction to the politics of, that probably couldn't have happened unless we had what we have now, which is Trump and the like the antithesis of, the polar opposites,
Well,
right? Increased racism,
has,
and now that's like a reaction from our society saying, no, we're going to not only embrace the black character, but we're going to make him the most popular character ever. It's kind of like,
I think
we'll
it
show
has
you.
to do with setting up the evolution of the story curve the right way. If you look at the way the Marvel stories had been evolving, okay, it evolved. Civil War couldn't exist without the previous movies. Black Panther couldn't exist without Civil War. So there's an escalation here, a leapfrog effect, that Marvel shows it knew what it was doing. The movie directors knew what was going on. They sat down 10 years ago when this all started, and they figured, here's our story arc, here's how we're going to get to this point. Did they ever expect Black Panther to result in this? No. They expected it to make some good money, but they never expected it to outdo all of the other Marvel movies. So
what is their motivation? Are they trying to shift humanity to a higher level, or is it money? What is their motivation? Marvel.
I think for the movie director,
it's money, but I think that it backfired in their face, and the evolution and the awakening of everybody.
That's the thing they can't understand. They did it for money, but now, like Linda said, it backfired, and it's like, oh, okay, where do we go from here? So they backed themselves into a corner. But that's a good thing. That's all part of the, the spiritual insurrection, the revolution. And it was bound to happen. I mean, you roll the dice enough times, eventually the law of averages are going to work in your favor. So, but yeah, everybody.
Well, it seems like they've been
doing
putting their money behind Benedict Cumberbatch and Doctor Strange. That was like, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And now because of the Black Panther, they're not doing it, or they have no plans for a sequel for Doctor Strange. But he's featured in his characters as kind of like a group ensemble character, rather than the stars.
Yes, but that's where things have been going all along, ever since the 70s. When the Matrix came along, it kicked it into high gear on the big screen, as opposed to Deep Space Nine on the small screen. Okay, whereas you have, once again, the Captain Sisko character, but in this case it's Lawrence Fishburne, known as Morpheus. Okay, and instead of Odo, it's Neo, and he takes Neo under his wing as the pale-skinned outcast and rescues him from the corporate environment. And of course, who is the corporate environment? It's the machine, and it's Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones, and they're after Neo. Okay, it's in the name too. Morpheus, the teacher that can morph into anything.
And the Oracle is a black woman.
And the Oracle is a black woman, the real power. Okay, Neo, it's in his name. The Zeitgeist.
They
the
did
Neo,
that on the Oracle in Star Trek Next Generation was what's her name? They started making the black characters, the smart ones, the ones that have all.
Oh yes, I remember. Guinan. Yes, Guinan.
Yeah.
It was Whoopi Goldberg. Yes.
And
she had again, she had a special relationship with Captain Picard. For several reasons, which they allude to throughout the series and the movies that came afterwards. So, you have the Oracle there, and of course, who does the Oracle have to go up against in the Matrix? She has to go up against the Architect, who of course is an old white man who has a stick up his ass about everything, because to him, it all has to be controlled. Where the Oracle is like, no, we're just going to see how this plays out and let the variables fall where they may. And the Architect is like, how long do you think this will last? By the time they get to the third movie and the end of it. And a famous line from her is, "It'll last as long as it can." End of story. And the architect doesn't like that answer, okay? So, because the architect wants to know how to control, calculate, for him it's all about math, where are the controlled variables. And the oracle is more psychic. No, let's just go along and see what happens. And then, of course, absolute power, breeds corruption. Absolutely. So you have the character of representing the police state, Mr. Smith, who himself all of a sudden realizes that there's more in it for himself than there is for the corporation he works for. So he becomes
Hello? Uh-oh. Are you there? I'm sorry. All of a sudden you were not there. Okay, so back up a few sentences and start again.
That's okay. Yeah, I was saying, I was talking about the character of Mr. Smith, okay?
Uh-huh.
He's a corporate agent. He represents the police state. Him and the other two characters that were with him. But at the same time, he sees something more in it for himself, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He decides to become that rogue element, and he becomes the computer virus. Okay? So now the machine can't find this virus, and the virus is taking over and multiplying over and over and turning the police state to his own favor. And the machine is now under attack. So, of course, what happens here? The machine realizes that, and the architect realizes, well, okay, we can't calculate this. We don't know where the virus is because we can't see it. But guess who can? The unknown variable. The one that the oracle says, hey, let's see what happens. And that unknown variable is Neo. So all of a sudden now the machine has to realize that it has to coexist with the unknown element of the human condition, and it can't keep exterminating the human beings because it's the human being that's going to protect it from the virus. Mm-hmm. And that's the final showdown between Neo, the outcast, who was taught by the prophet teacher what to do, who goes up against one of his own kind, which is Mr. Smith. And that's the powerful symbolism in there, just like Odo going up against his own people. Wow. You see it in Star Wars as well, when it was no accident that they picked Samuel L. Jackson to play the part of Mace Windu, second only to Yoda. He was the supreme master Jedi. Okay, once again, the master teacher, the Christ figure. But here, this time around, George Lucas decides to play a bit of a reversal here, because the pale-skinned outcast, the freak, is Anakin Skywalker. Okay? And they bring him to the Jedi Council. He's supposed to be under the wing of Mace Windu and Yoda. But in this case here, the pale-skinned outcast turns to the dark side, the corporate element, and turns against his own master. Okay? So there was a little bit of a twist there that George Lucas threw in on purpose in the symbolism between the Moorish legacy and the Masonic agenda. In this case, the student had become so corrupted that he became their worst nightmare and turned against his own master. And what does he do to Mace Windu? In the final showdown, he ends up cutting Mace Windu's arms right off. Now, that's a powerful symbol that comes. What do his arms, his hands represent? That's his tools. He can't use the lightsaber, he can't use the Force. He's got to have his hands to do it. That's where you project it. Well, once he cuts Mace Windu's arms off, he's basically killing his own teacher. And we see that play out in ancient history with the original God King, Hiram Abiff, who actually built the Temple of Solomon with his own magical tools, his own, setting wall, his own magical architectural tools. And sure enough, what happened? These assassins came, killed him, and took his tools away from him. That was the symbolism of that scene where the emperor turns the pale-skinned outcast against his own master and cuts his arms off. It was a symbolism towards killing Hiram Abiff and therefore trying to sabotage the Temple of Solomon by stealing the magical tools, the spiritual tools that were necessary to build it in the first place. In this case,
so do you think that the casting is intentional to have, these characters based on their skin color play these certain, roles?
Yes,
I was watching a show by Shonda Rhimes, and she had a Shakespeare thing, which would have been all like Italian people in Verona. But instead of casting based on color, she just cast people. And that's how she does her shows. Like she'll have a, what's that one that she does that's about the doctors in Seattle. So she just kind of pulls them out of her hat. So she's got to have a couple. So she just kind of pulls it out of the hat, and she can have a mixed race couple, a same-sex couple. They can have a child that's a different color. So she mixes it up. So she's intentionally not casting based on color, but based on talent. And a lot of these people are already like pre-selected. We're going to have them on a future show. And then when it comes to it, it's like, okay, this person's ready for that, and we'll put them in this role. And so I've seen them do all kinds of variations on the theme to probably show a greater diversity of our society than it actually is. But maybe it is in certain parts of the world. So but it seems like they're intentionally, we start with the cowboys, white hat, black hat, white clothes, black clothes, right? So now they're doing some kind of role reversal or some kind of, what is the intention of this? Symbolism
It's done on purpose there. You even see it as early as Zorro. Zorro, coming long before Batman, was the first time you see the role reversal and the symbolism. He was the good guy, but he was dressed all in black. Mm-hmm. The bad guys were dressed all in white. Okay? Uh-huh. You see that in the version of Zorro that was played, I think, by Frank Langella in 80s, I think. You see it later on. I can't think of his name now, but the Spanish actor who took over the Zorro role, I think in the 90s or the 2000s. And then of course,
was that Tony Banderas or something? What's his name? Banderas?
Who?
Something like that.
Antonio Banderas.
Antonio Banderas.
Yeah.
God,
so
where did I store that in my memory? I pulled that
And what's interesting, if when you look at the evolution of things, when Sylvester Stallone was having a rebirth with his director and acting career, he came back with a couple of, like 3 great comeback movies, which was Assassins, Demolition Man, and Cliffhanger. All of them were really good. And in Assassins, it's the first time you see Antonio Banderas introduced. And this guy couldn't speak a lick of English at all. He was learning English on the fly, doing the script with Sylvester Stallone. And he actually intentionally gave Antonio Banderas the front seat in that, while he intentionally took a back seat in that story on purpose. And it got critics raved about it, that he did that. And then of course, he went on to come back in a big way with a lot of other better movies as opposed to his earlier career. But even so, the bad guy is always going to be seen as this, pristine, pure, puritanical corporate type. Okay, you see that symbolism across the board. That's the Masonic agenda playing itself out on the screen, on the TV, in books, literature, wherever it's going. And the good guys, usually led by someone who is 7 shades darker as the Christ figure or the prophet or the emissary, representing the Moorish legacy and the Temple of Solomon. They're the ones who are on this personal quest, almost like a spiritual journey against insurmountable odds. And you see it playing itself out over and over and over again, nonstop. So it's once you start knowing how to look at it, using Star Trek Deep Space Nine as a basis to go from, you'll see it everywhere, and you won't be able to get away from it. So that's why I was quite interested. I found it quite interesting to see that the Marvel movies had picked up on that and actually went that way at the end of Civil War with that same type of symbolism. Okay? Whereas now the good guy is the enemy of the state, who is now taken under the wing of the dark-skinned savior, of which the country of Wakanda is now itself, in total, the Temple of Solomon, the safe haven. So it's no surprise to me, seeing what's been going on with the Invisible College since the 1960s, 1970s, and then, of course, seeing it kick into high gear in the 80s and 90s. It's no mystery, it's no surprise to me to see a character like Black Panther finally take center stage, both with profit and revenue and with popularity beyond anyone's expectations. Doesn't surprise me at all, and where they went with that storyline as well.
Wow. Well, I haven't kept up like you have. My goodness, you stay on top of it. But it's really, I realized the value of staying on top of what's going on with our, media, because there's a lot being revealed there, a lot that they're. So you're saying that, like the boomerang, the backfiring effect from the Black Panther, whatever their original agenda was money or something, but it's actually creating consciousness and enlightenment. This whole whatever is panning out with the different things is. So tell us more about how is our society evolving and becoming more conscious. Right now it seems to be getting darker in many ways, but there's always the darkness before the dawn, right? But from your perspective, what's going on with our world right now, our crazy planet?
Yeah. The only reason it seems to be getting darker is because, like the symbolism we've talked about up to this point in the movies, you have also a generational divide, which plays itself out in the movies too, and on the political landscape of America. You have the older generation who wants to kowtow to holidays like Flag Day and Veterans Day and Independence Day and Memorial Day, and let's just have our barbecues and not rock the boat, let's stand behind our president. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not what the younger generation wants anymore, because the younger generation has inherited a pile of shit rolling downhill from the last 3 generations, starting with the World War II generation, okay? And the whole hoorah, we're number one mentality, nothing can stop us. Well, that was a huge detriment to us, because that created a brainwashing mechanism that was easily put in place by the Red Scare and McCarthyism, to which everybody was then scared shitless into asking any questions or protesting in any way against their government, without being labeled an outcast to the Ozzie and Harriet neighborhood. Okay? That evolved into from the 1950s, evolved into the rebellion of the 60s, because once again, the younger generation was, screw that. I'm not inheriting your hypocrisy and bigotry. Unfortunately, some of them may have gone about it the wrong way, and that created a detrimental backlash. I mean, I'm not criticizing that, but that's what happened. And that resulted in the depressed, basically fucked up mentality of the 70s, because everybody just gave up, receded into themselves, and became a drug addict in the 70s, and gave up and said, to hell with it. We couldn't do it in the 60s. I'm just going to, bury myself in my own misery with heroin addiction and so forth in the 70s. This resulted in a nasty backlash of individualism, and I don't mean to say that that's a bad thing, but in this context, it became something where when we came out of our drug-addled state of the 70s, okay, we entered into a very selfish, self-serving phase in the 80s that said, well, screw all that protesting crap. That's not going to get you anywhere. I got to look out for myself. Screw everybody. So this became the hostile corporate takeover mentality of the 80s, which then evolved into this more kind of like, whatever, fuck it mentality of the 90s. Okay, basically, like in The Big Lebowski, it's funny in there, but the reality is much uglier, because that created another negative backlash. And it wasn't until all of that rolling downhill, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, okay? All of that rolling downhill to the year 2000, when we had become so misanthropic, so irresponsible with our responsibility to our government, proactively protesting against all odds, okay, and to actively participate and take back what is ours in the first place, that it turned into this absolute illegitimate imbecile getting into the White House, George W. Bush, illegally and illegitimately, because nobody gave a damn anymore. And that ultimately turned into a bit of a good thing, because it snapped everyone in the ass and said, oh shit, I haven't been participating in this government for 50 years, and after 50 years, this is what it turned into, because at that point, the shadow government, the Chateau regime, the corporate elements stepped in and said, let's take advantage of this and put our own interests in power. Sure enough, that evolves into George W. Bush, Dick Cheney. And when the country was on the verge of civil war at that point, because of that nasty backlash that came out of that and said, oh my God, what the hell did I do to myself? Okay, this idiot is waging illegal wars all over the damn planet and getting us involved in stuff we never should have been involved in, illegally and illegitimately, that he's turning into a damn tyrant. Well, okay, people started waking up at that point, which was a good thing, but ultimately waking up just enough, just a tiny bit, to the point where we get a black man in the White House. Okay, well, what happened? He was used as a pacification method, and everybody went back to sleep and went back into a damn coma again. Oh, he'll take care of it. No, he's not Captain Sisko. He's not Morpheus. He's stuck in a muck and mire of shit in the White House. You have to stay involved. You have to get behind him. Nobody did that. They thought he was going to do it all by himself. Okay? And as such, what happened? He couldn't get anything accomplished because the damn powers that be kept stopping him every step of the way, because God forbid a black man should be in the White House other than carrying a silver tray. And what happened with that? We had this nasty, vicious uprising of white nationalism and white supremacy that resulted in the illegal and illegitimate election of an absolute belligerent, clown, misogynistic, rapist pig by the name of Donald Trump. So this is where we're at right now. And the good side of it is, just like with George W. Bush, people are realizing the mistake they made in between with Barack Obama, not sticking behind him and not staying involved, And now the younger generation is extremely politically motivated, extremely politically educated, which in no small part, all of these damn school shootings that are killing the children, the Parkland school itself serving as a trigger point against the Trump administration, to which this whole younger generation is now rallying around that as a political movement. The older generation doesn't like that because they want to leave everything as is. And I'm sorry, but, you can't. Organizations like the NRA and the Ku Klux Klan, they are now being targeted by this younger generation, and that's a good thing because that's going to clean out all the bad blood there. And that might get a little uglier depending on what your perception of ugly is. As far as I'm concerned, it's all part of the political process. But the older generation is trying to silence the younger generation by saying, oh, that's just a bunch of political crap. You're not supposed to talk about that. I'm tired of all this political crap. Yeah, but you're the one that created problems, Grandma and Grandpa, because your damn hypocrisy dumped on these children, resulting in them being gunned down in their own school. Okay, so this is where it stands at this point. The spiritual insurrection has now become the political enlightenment, the political activism of the younger generation. And that younger generation are millennials, and they don't give a flying shit about skin color or gender. And that's what scares the crap out of the corporate elements, which are pro-white supremacy, the NRA, the Ku Klux Klan, the Trump administration. Not one of them knows what to do with this because they're on the wrong side of history and they're dead in the water.
Wow. Well, that's a good summary. I have a couple of things different, but I'm not going to go over that. I lived through that period, and I am a child of I was born in the 50s, so I went through the 60s. I guess a lot of it's based on your perspective and where you were raised. To me, it seemed like we were getting there, because I'm over here in Maui, right? It's very liberal part of the world and very conscious and spiritual. And I was born in. I was super high on life in the 60s and 70s. I thought it was just magical. The 80s, it was very fun for me. I was dating again. I'd gone through a first marriage, which was very interesting. But by the second, I was celebrating, and we had a lot of good music and dancing. But people were shifting into materialism. I noticed that in the 80s. And I don't know, 90s was a blur, but the 90s, I had a good time the whole time. I thought the world was evolving and getting conscious, and then what really slammed everything was 911, and that's where my perspective, I said, who's hijacked my reality? Because we were going through the home stretch. We were going to evolve, become conscious, and all of a sudden these, cabal, Illuminati. I knew the moment the Twin Towers were hit. I woke up. I actually went into a coma before the Twin Towers. I was in bed, and I was, like, dying because I felt it. And my best friend, same thing. We felt it, and we pieced it together. Later, she said, yeah, I was in a coma, and I woke up, and the Twin Towers were falling. And I said, me too. I literally, everybody's down. I don't really have a television, but we had this little black and white television. Everybody's huddled around this television watching the Twin Towers fall over and over. And as soon as I saw that, I went, oh, no, they set it up. It's a whole total setup. It's a scam. I instantly got it, and I was furious. So that's where, I was, we'll go back to our experiencer, I'm a contactee. I was shown that timeline, and I selected another timeline. I went, oh, no, somebody stole the timeline. It was literal for me. It's like, because I knew that was a possibility that they would take it to that. So then, and then when we were coming down to the election, it's like, no, don't vote for that man. And they interestingly enough, they put the Handmaid's Tale. And I said, if you vote for Trump, we're going to have Orwell's 84. We're going to have Handmaid's Tale, a dystopian society where women have no rights. And right now we see things like they're trying to pass legislation. I forget what state it is, but not only make abortion illegal, but you can be punished. You'll get the death penalty if you have an abortion. The death penalty.
Yeah, that's...
And somebody's trying to push that through now. And it's like, holy shit, this is Handmaid's Tale.
A lot of that is coming from Mike Pence, who was such a draconian, horrible governor of the state he came from, or a representative. I think it was Indiana or Illinois, so one of those states he came from, that when Trump picked him to be his vice presidential running mate, the people of that state were like, thank God, please take him. We can't stand him. Yes, take him. Because his state, once again, I can't remember if it's Indiana or Illinois.
It doesn't matter.
His state has the most draconian rules against women and abortion clinics for women's health. And that's why they couldn't wait to get rid of him and stick him.
But see, people are voting for him. What is going on?
Yeah.
See, I was born and raised in the most progressive time in history. We were out in mass walking the streets with Martin Luther. Yeah, he got killed, but it just kept going. And we got all this stuff going. I mean, my parents were bigots, and of course, the children rebel against the parents. So I rebelled against my bigoted parents. But even before they died, their best friend was a black man. You know, a very dark black man. I went, oh, they got it. They didn't die unconscious and rude and ignorant. You know, they got it. And so we were making so much progress. And then all of a sudden, and then women's rights. When I was a child, my girlfriends got pregnant. They couldn't even consider getting abortions, and their whole lives were changed because they ended up having these children when they were children. And I always say to people that are against abortion, it's like, well, they have artificial wombs now, and they can transfer fetuses. Go and stand in line and take those baby fetuses.
I remember
the
news reports coming out of the 80s, the late 80s. A lot of the news topics that dominated the late 80s was babies having babies. And I remember that while I was in high school. And I was like, what the hell are these 13-year-olds having babies for?
Because when you're a child, you're raging hormones. And back in the 60s, there was no easy access to birth control because you had to get through mom and dad, right? So you couldn't have that conversation. There was no way. You have to make it safe for children to say, I want to have sex, instead of being like, you're going to go to hell. You have this reaction. You're raging hormones to have sex. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's the other part of the spiritual awakening is moving away from organized religion, traditional religion, okay, and moving towards a more spiritual understanding of your relationship to the earth, basically a Native American understanding. But of course, we're not allowed to say that out in the open because they're all dark-skinned heathens and they're all paganistic and all that. I'm like, really? We're past that. We're well into the doorstep of the 21st century here, okay? But so I love it when the religious types, and most of the time when I say religious types, I'm targeting the Christians because they're just fun to pick on. But the thing is that they backpedal. It's like, when you start confronting them on the issue of aliens, it's like, well, God is so wondrous. He must have created them too. I'm like, first of all, do you even know how the hell the word God, a man-made term, came into existence in the first place? So
that's a whole other story.
And that's a whole other story. We're not getting into it. I'm just saying, this is what happens.
Well, let's do another show on that. Remind me. That would be a good one to get into. Because from my research is showing that the Satan is just the one that lost the war. They're the opposing all this stuff becomes a religion. But no, that's just the person that lost the war, and God is just the title, and all this stuff. We could discuss that. That's another show. We'll do one down the line. But yeah, so back to what you were saying. Sorry, I hijacked you.
So yeah, we're moving this whole thing with the millennials, the spiritual insurrection, Moorish legacy, Temple of Solomon, the whole political uprising and political involvement. I mean, the older generation is going to have to wrap their head around this in order to relate to their own kids, because the bottom line is you have economics running through like a golden thread on everything. And when economics escalates, it becomes politics. And when politics escalates, it becomes war. And that's the simple sequence of events there throughout any civilization. It all starts with an economic understanding. These kids get that. Mm-hmm. And even though I might be picking on the gun industry right now, and that's one small example, but it's a great example because what's it about? It's about profit, and it's about this malevolent, sadistic mentality of, I have to have my AK-47. Why? What the hell are you going to do with that? Oh, I'm going to take it out hunting. I thought hunting was supposed to be a sport. We're going to spray bullets into the damn woods and kill everybody else? Okay? I thought you were supposed to use a rifle like a real marksman, like a real skilled person, and have the balls to go up against a bear on your own instead of using a machine gun or an automatic. If you don't have that, then you don't belong out there. Okay? Because as far as I'm concerned, I'm rooting for the bear. Okay? And that's one aspect of it. And the kids know this, the high schoolers, the teenagers. And their parents are going to have to get on board with their kids to back them up.
Most of them are.
And most of them are. This is a very personal thing for Linda, too, because she came from that area of the school district in Florida.
I actually worked for that school district, and I knew some of those.
Wow.
The middle school that I worked in, some of those kids fed into that high school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. And I applaud them on a daily basis for what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and it's, it's like, I understand you got to take the political fight in measures, and right now the main measure should be get rid of weapons of war. I mean, it's the same reason why the average citizen is not allowed to buy a tank or a rocket launcher. These are weapons of war. So what the hell are you buying a semi-automatic weapon for? That's a weapon of war.
I even take it another level. You talk about your basic right to have a life, and that somebody will take your life away.
Right.
I've seen so much happen with domestic violence, and because a gun is convenient, it gets pulled, where if it wasn't in the home, my friends wouldn't be dead. I've just seen it over and over my entire life. One of my dear friends that I used to sleep over at her house when I was growing up, she got shot in the head sitting at her own kitchen table. They never found who did it. Now, I just found out recently that my brother's friend, female friend, and she used to go out with their whole gang karaoke, she's dead. She got shot, by her husband, domestic violence.
Yes.
When I was a young woman, I got married at 16, and my first husband used to hold a gun to my head, cocked, and ready to go. One day I escaped and broke free, and I ran up the back door, and he shot at me. Where are my rights? I'm alive, like something, an angel. But I would have died back in the 70s. Because why?
And
so
I think,
I'm traumatized by this whole issue. I don't think that anybody should have a gun. But see, I'm so radical. I've had people threaten to unfriend me because I think that way. And it's like, well, you didn't live my life. People, and then there was a family when I was growing up that the father killed the whole family. It was part of my classmates. I go, that's just me. How often does this story repeat? Go ahead. Sorry.
Richard is no stranger to domestic violence. He grew up in it. And my cousin, my first cousin in California, her husband, who ended up being her ex-husband, decided to show up at her house where she was with her parents, and he proceeded to kill her parents in front of her, attempted to kill her. She almost died. And the two boys that were her children watched the whole thing. And then he turned the gun on himself and killed himself in front of his two boys. So I sympathize with you.
I think this issue needs to be looked at because where are the rights of these people? And so I really applaud these kids that they're forcing the issue. But we need to establish basic human rights for people across the board.
Yes.
Across the
one of those
human, what are the basic human rights? Go ahead.
Yeah.
One of those human rights policies would come in the form of high insurance premiums, just like car insurance, boat insurance, house insurance, okay? If you own a gun, you got to take out an insurance policy. And if someone dies at the hand of your gun, even if it wasn't in your hands, you have to pay that family, your insurance company would have to pay them, one hell of an amount. And that doesn't make up for who died, but it's a curtailing policy that would get down to the nitty-gritty of the human rights issue. You want to have that gun? Fine. You got to be responsible for it. You have to take a quote-unquote driving test, just like you do with a car. You have to take that gun out with officials. You have to show them you have a high level of skill. You have to prove legally what reason you have to have that gun, just like you would, with anything else. And you have to take out, once again, ultimately, an insurance policy so that if anybody dies at the hand of your gun, you are responsible.
I just want to add something to that. You should also have to take a written test, just like you have to take a written test before you get your driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
You should have to take a written test for your gun knowledge and gun safety. And I'm speaking from the perspective that my dad was an NRA member. He was the secretary for his chapter of the NRA on Long Island. I grew up with guns. They were around me all the time. I was the only kid in my neighborhood at 12 years old that knew how to repack bullets and make new bullets. But I never touched a gun ever in my life, and I don't think I need to ever touch a gun. I was taught how to...
What about a test for sanity? Are these people sane?
Well, that should be part of it, too. You should have... No, I agree. You should have a background check. And if you've been into therapy for depression or anxiety or any kind of that, then you should have limited access, if any, to
What about
a gun.
emotional intelligence test? Do you have the morality to own a gun?
I think as
because
it starts,
there were no tests, there's no background on 99% of the people if they've never been to therapy. They didn't go to therapy because they weren't forced into it, but they needed therapy.
There's nothing for a gun. You can walk into Walmart right now and get a gun. There's no time frame to wait for anything. You have the cash. See, that's the problem. Money talks, bullshit walks. You have money, you can get whatever kind of gun you want. Mm-hmm. Now, are they going to ever stop the black market for it in the street? Probably not, unless we become a police state and have the National Guard out 24/7 and we have a curfew. It's always going to be sold in the black market, but you have to make it a little harder, actually a lot harder in my eyes, for people to just go out and buy something. Even if it's just a handgun, a little Beretta, a .22, something. There should be steps.
I've heard that there's a way. Now we're going extraterrestrial here. But remember the day the Earth stood still, and they neutralized all guns.
Yes.
So I've heard about technology, like when we in Star Trek, we go into a planet, we can see all the life forms, and we can see. So there's a way of detecting, everything. Like money now is getting trackers in it, but somehow, anyway, I don't know. There's got to be. I always look at the techno fixes. You know what I'm saying? It's like there's a techno fix of somehow neutralizing these and for people to have it in the wrong hands, so they just don't work. But
the only thing that guns are going to kill are ourselves. I don't think if we actually had a mass landing right now of extraterrestrials, I don't think anybody, I don't care if they had an earth-to-air missile launcher or anything, I don't think anybody from here would be able to kill any of those that came down. I think they would, just like you said, they would be able to neutralize every stinking weapon that we have. So we're only going to be hurting ourselves, which is what we do on a daily basis anyway.
Right. I interviewed a whistleblower recently, like within the last 2 weeks, and I can't remember who it was, sorry. But they know everything we're thinking. So there's no way you could shoot them because, they'll just blink out or whatever. They'll have their energy shield or they'll neutralize it somehow, yeah. I mean, they can freeze time and just whip it out of your hand.
Exactly.
And unfreeze and then be aiming at you. So it's like, that's not going to work. It's not going to work against people with high technology.
They have a way of abducting people and nobody else can see it when they do it. So we're going to be able to shoot them with a gun? I don't think so.
No, that's not going to work. So they're really wanting to have guns to shoot against other human beings, just like it goes back to the 1700s when we had to have a revolutionary war, right? And we had to fight against King George and all the troops for our independence. So we're operating in the 21st century like it was the 1700s, right? And that's our thoughts.
Yeah.
That policy went in back then. We need to rethink this.
Yeah, and then the other thing too is that once again, that older generational mentality of, well, you can't touch the Constitution, you can't touch the Bill of Rights. Excuse me, it's called an amendment. The root word is amend, to change, to alter, to improve. Okay?
Be careful what you say about the older generation because she and I are both baby boomers, okay?
Older.
So be nice.
and my husband's a war baby. So and he's the most hippie-ish person you're ever going to meet. And he was talking about somebody was going to is thinking in the lines of just taking away the Second Amendment. Like it doesn't. He said that other countries, if there's a need for someone to have guns, just like in the Wild West, they would go to the sheriff, and the sheriff would go, "Here's the gun, boys. Let's go out and have a posse and hunt down that, bank robber or that train robber," right? Apparently, there are a lot of countries that don't really have weapons around like that. Well, I guess England, they don't really carry guns. Police don't carry guns. But we have to look at other societies that are not like this one. This one's kind of a paranoid society that's operating because King George tried to take us out, and they have these historical, like we were talking about at the beginning of the show, these are stories about the hero. Here comes the invading force, and here's Paul Revere who does his ride, and so he made his mark in history because he was the hero, spreading the word, and yada, yada, yada. The hero story.
I know, and it's just that things are going to have to evolve. Otherwise, many years ago, around 2006, at the time that George W. Bush was in the White House, there were several Republican senators who were already brazenly coming out in front of the media and saying that the Constitution is nothing more than an anachronism. And for the corporate types on the Republican side, I can see why those selfish bastards would say that with their lobbyists and the oil and the guns and the profiteering and, the warmongering and all that. But the point is, they weren't wrong. And it's this younger generation now that realizes what they need to do to take it back so that it doesn't fall prey to becoming an anachronism. And the way to take it back is to change it for something that suits the 21st century. We're working with a constitution, a contract, an outdated contract that comes from the 1700s. Okay.
Right.
And that mentality. Do you really think George Washington or Paul Revere or James Madison or John Hancock, would have written things the way they did had they see the onslaught of an AK-47.
I'm sure if they were here,
Okay.
they would really consider amending everything that they wrote.
They would be on that
Right.
faster than shit through a goose, changing that. But on top of that, in the Second Amendment, it makes it very clear, well-regulated militia. It was never meant for the average person to have a gun.
Mm-mm.
Well-regulated.
Right,
That's a reference
right.
to government.
That's the thing. The militia was supposed to have the guns, not
Right.
Joe Average that's sitting in his house with his kid.
But of course, this has turned into once again that twisted, lackadaisical, white privilege mentality of I'm going to create a militia of my own, a commune of my own. Screw the government. Well, okay. Once again, you're creating the monster. You're creating your own self-fulfilling prophecy by reneging on your responsibilities to that Constitution in the first place. Okay?
They're all going to be in a rude awakening.
So if you're going to renege on that and create your own monster, then you created the problem in the first place, and your views are outdated, outmoded, and need to be put in check by the younger generation that has very different views, very different needs. Okay? They don't want to hear this militia crap about, Big Brother's coming to get me. Okay, first of all, whatever little pop gun you have, whatever cool little assault rifle you have, is not going to stand up to the high-tech weapons that the U.S. military, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines can employ, against you.
Sure
Okay?
as hell it's not going to stand up to any alien invasion.
All right, I mean, they don't even have to come to your militia compound. They could just have a Navy ship off the coast of, let's say, Florida, launch an invisible weapon at you because the Navy gets first dibs on alien technology and reverse engineering it, and they pass it on to the Air Force. Okay? So, I mean, it just becomes utterly ridiculous. And the military has to kowtow to Congress. And Congress has to kowtow to the people. And that's the way it works. And the minute you fall out of that alignment and forget your purpose and realize that you as a citizen are at the top of the pyramid, not at the bottom, and that's what happened from the 1950s on. We sent ourselves to the bottom of the pyramid. We did that to ourselves. And we willingly became obedient, subservient. We started becoming good Republicans and good Democrats, and we forgot what it meant to be good Americans. Okay?
So how did we send ourselves to the bottom? I kind of missed that. Say that again. We sent ourselves to the bottom of the pyramid.
From the 1950s on, with the belligerence of the Red Scare and labeling everybody as an enemy of the state. And it was like all of a sudden we forgot what Nazi Germany was about 10 years before. Okay? So when the 50s came...
Are you talking about McCarthyism? Are you talking about McCarthyism?
Right, exactly. Right.
Right.
And
so, to really get our heads around that, I honestly was too young. It just is a bunch of television things. The communism and the threat. You weren't alive then. I don't know, Linda, what year you were born, but I was alive when I saw Khrushchev take his shoe off and pound it and say, "We will bury you. We are going to bury you."
Yes,
and
I remember
that was
video.
pretty scary, at least for a kid, because it wasn't a video. It wasn't the past. It was like really happening. Now, is all that stuff propaganda? I have whistleblowers at the highest level. They said, well, actually, at the highest level, this is one world government. And, if we get an outside threat, we have a common military. We blast the pirates that are coming in to kill humanity and go back to our normal game within the game. So the game within a game, right?
Right.
Were they doing that to keep us fear-based in this Cold War until it came down? For me, I grew up with get under your desk and duck and kiss your ass goodbye. We had drills going on, just like the kids have right now. We had drills going on, and we had the continuing threat of the Cold War never knowing when. Oh, their target was Pittsburgh. That's where I was raised. Pittsburgh's going to go first because of the steel mill. Oh, great! I'm living in the sea. It's going to go first, and nothing's changed. A month ago or whatever, January, right? I get a thing on my phone that says incoming missile to Hawaii. This is not a drill. You have 15 minutes to live. Basically, that's what it said. So we're still doing this shit that keeps us paranoid and afraid of our neighbors, afraid of other countries. The whole problem is like what John Lennon said. Imagine there's no religions, no countries. Imagine. And we're able to image. We're able to imagine. That's what they're doing, is to keep us from imagining a world where we live as one. It sounds like a cliche, but I think that's their greatest fear. If we stop demonizing the apparent other and we come together and love each other and go beyond skin color, race, religion, color, like these kids are doing. We were starting to do that in the 60s. Somehow our reality got hijacked into this extreme paranoia, which culminated with 9/11. And we're in that reality. We're in a different timeline, different reality. But we need this catalyst on some level. We need the ridiculous Trump, who is so much like Hitler. It isn't funny. And the other dictators that pop up. It's almost like this whole culture we have is designed to pop up a dictator. We start having this cooperation with people, and it polarizes that extreme when we pop up a dictator somewhere in time and space on some part of the planet, and that one acts out this negative polarity.
And that's because, once again, it's that older generation's mentality of, well, we need an instant fix. This guy will do it for us, and the younger generation is like, no, we're going to take over and we're going to make the change. We don't care about the idiot in the White House. We were doing the same thing in the 60s. We were marching against Nixon and Johnson. Mm-hmm. We did the same thing. We did it every day. See, these kids have just begun. They don't know what it took. My husband and his people, they took down the Vietnam War. And then it went to a movement where people were just leaving. They were bailing. It's like, no, I'm not marching up that mountain, up that hill to kill people that I don't even know. No. So we had to stop. They threw down their guns and they left. And there was nobody left. So they got out of there. But these kids, this one thing they did, that's not it. You have to do it ongoing. We did it for 10 years to get rid of the Vietnam War. And I was there. I watched it. And my husband was a leader. He was old enough. I was just a kid. But I aligned with them. Even though I was in a Republican family, I had to polarize against my own family. I basically kept my mouth shut around my parents. But, in my heart, I was with the movement because I was growing up with these boys that as soon as they graduated high school, they were getting drafted and they were going to go off and get killed. And so my older classmates in my school, they were coming home in body bags, and we were hearing about it. So that's kind of what has to happen with this generation. Oh, my friends are dying. These are people I love. But they can't just stop after 1 million people in Washington. That was a good job. Keep it up. When's your next one? Yes, and they're well aware of the fact that Australia solved its problem real fast in the 90s after one mass killing.
Mm-hmm. What did they do? What did Australia do?
They got rid of the guns, and everybody was like, okay, this is not the right thing to do, and everybody turned in their guns. And now everyone over there who wants a gun has to go through rigorous and heavy licensing and certification there. But ultimately, the government in Australia said, to hell with this crap, no more of this. We're passing policies and decrees. Everybody's got to give up their guns. And they brought that to an end.
So how are you going to do that? Okay, because that's a different, those are the people that got sent to Australia because they were criminals. And they got, these are the descendants of the people that already thought they were second-class citizens because their ancestors were the ones that were rejected from the, the European society. And they were sent off to Botany Bay to these colonies. And so they have a different mentality. We have a story, like we talked about at the beginning. We're operating on these stories. It's an archetype, it's a paradigm, and it goes deep and affects all consciousness. We have this story about the evil, wicked King George. And so he was white, so he was the demon. Sorry. So, I'm just putting it out there. We only have 10 minutes left on this, but I'm just brainstorming.
Actually,
this is a different reality. And this is like your thing that you did in school when you were in college. Let's go back to that. How do we do this with our society that's so different than Australia?
We actually share the same history with Australia, because people seem to think that people were willingly coming over here, and somehow it was different for Botany Bay over in Australia. It wasn't any different at all. The 13 colonies here were prison colonies, just the same as Botany Bay. And every rapist,
how were they
thug,
prison colonies?
and killer, because everybody who came over here was the scumbag of society. All right, we seem to have this notion
that we were
that
refugees fleeing something that we didn't like. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it wasn't even that. Okay, we were criminals, rapists, murderers, and we were given a choice. You're either going to be executed for your crimes, or you could go over there, risk life and limb, create your own rules, and make a profit for us, and make sure we get a cut of the action back here in Europe. So that's the choice that they were given to go to no man's land.
I don't have that story. Can you? Because the story I have that I was told, which was verified by my Ancestry.com, is that the first wave came over on the Mayflower, and the official story is escaping religious persecution. But you're saying that those people were criminals. But then the second story was Roanoke, Virginia. They came over there. So then the next wave came over with the potato blight in the 1860s. So there was no food. So my ancestry story, personal one, is more of refugees. But you're saying a lot of it was. I don't have that story. But I'm interested in this thing and finding out where you're getting that
the
paradigm
Mayflower
from.
And pilgrims and all that. They represent an iota of a fraction of an inkling on a pinhead of what actually came over here. But we've inflated that story over time into this romantic notion about pilgrims and Native Americans and all that crap. And,
story.
Just try going to a Native American reservation and mention the term Thanksgiving. Watch how fast you get your throat slit, okay?
Oh, I understand. I didn't buy that story.
Yeah.
The other one is one by, what's his name, Freeman, the guy who, he says that a lot of the black people and Native American actually go back to, he doesn't symbol it this way, but what he's saying is they've been here before Columbus. So they go back to the Olmecs, and I guess when the with Toth and Nikita and Enki, and they came over here. So the story of the slave ships is greatly inflated and not true. There were some slave ships, but a lot of these people are native, indigenous, black people, and they're calling them all descendants of slaves to kind of shame them and make them feel like they're second class, just like the Botany Bay people were second class. The Native people go to Australia because they just wanted to get the heck out of England, which may not have been the best place to live all the time. That type of thing.
Yeah. There's also, we've kind of turned the terms over time, white and black, into a racial and class structure issue, but originally words like white and black were references to real estate and who the real estate owner was. If you could be a black man owning real estate, you'd be referred to as white because that was a reference to the owner, and those who worked on the estate were referred to as blacks, although they could be white or black in terms of skin color, and because they were operating for the white person. So it was an economic status originally, but because of slavery, it got turned into what it is today, black being black person. Yeah. And white being...
over here in Hawaii, they call everybody Hallie, which they're translating to mean white, but it's actually that you're not indigenous to this land, so you're not Hawaiian, and so everybody, an African black, person could be a Hallie just as well as a Chinese or Asian or any other race, color, creed. They're all Hallies. But it got so you say the same thing happened with that because it was. Well, that's very interesting. So how do we unravel all this? Because over time we lose the original stories. They get taken over by somebody that's controlling our reality and creating these terms. It's just like Orwell's 1984.
You're never really going to get away from an economic system that resembles slavery. Slavery has been something that runs through all of human history.
Unless you get rid of money.
Yeah, it was never associated with racism until the 13 colonies here in America. And then all of a sudden it took a different turn. Because then all of a sudden you had the white slave owners coming over after the fact who didn't belong here, who were then grabbing both Native Americans who were here, black, red, tan, whoever, as well as Africans from the west coast of Africa with the Moafa there. And this is what turned into the animosity of racism being associated with slavery. But if you look back prior to that, all throughout history, slavery was not associated with racism. Okay,
and that also goes with the original branding system was the removing of the foreskin. That was the way to mark your slaves.
Even
that goes back to Abraham.
Even with the Egyptians, when they would take over another people, they would give them a choice. Work for us. In other words, be our slaves. We'll treat you fine. We're not going to abuse you. Or we kill you. so of course, the option was, okay, I'll be your slave. But, the point is, it wasn't this, it might have been a drudgery depending on what kind of job you have. But then today, jobs today are a drudgery anyway, and we don't call it slavery.
We're all slaves. Yes. If you're working for the man, you're not getting a fair wage, so to speak. You're working for the man. You can never get ahead. Very few get ahead, and it gets worse every year. So we're all corporate economic slaves. So that's the best way to have slavery is to make it so the slave doesn't really realize they're slaves. They think they're free.
Exactly.
But the only ones that are really free are the ones at the top that own the billions of dollars, and they have this whole economic system around money. And money is a slavery system. There's other ways of trade and sharing, and it's more like Ubuntu. We're running out of time. We have like 2 minutes. So let's wrap this up. Go ahead, you guys. Take it away.
The thing we wanted to let you guys know about is that Linda and I are putting on the Human Origins Conference this coming October 12th and 13th, Friday and Saturday this year. And the website for it is humanorigins.conference.com. And all the information is there. We have our speakers listed on there. We have a vendor page on there for the people interested in becoming vendors. Great opportunity there. And it's going to be held at the Inn at Rio Rancho, an event center, which is a great place to have a conference like this. And the speakers we're going to have there are Sonia Barrett and George Haas, Karen Christine Patrick and Brett Collins Shepard, and Ken Johnston's going to be there. Norris Francis Branham's going to be speaking there. He, of course, gets into that Native American element of, the dark-skinned Native American already being here with the Iroquois. Mm-hmm. And I'll be speaking there as well. So we're going to have, in total, including myself, 7 speakers there over Friday and Saturday. And tickets are on sale now. So, get them while they're there.
Okay. And the site, once again, is
HumanOriginsConference.com. Yeah, HumanOriginsConference.com.
HumanOriginsConference.com. Go over there and register now. All right. Well, that's the end of our show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
And let's do it again
Thank you.
soon. Love and blessings and aloha. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Want entertainment designed just for you? Then check out customizable streaming TV from Xfinity. It makes your life simple, easy, awesome.
Xfinity gives you customizable streaming TV options. Enjoy the most free shows anywhere on any device, and even access your streaming apps right on your TV with X1. Go to Xfinity.com, call 1-800-XFINITY, or visit a store today to learn more. Restrictions apply.